talking specifically about backpacking rim to rim, what are we looking at? We are looking at the connection between the main North Rim and the main South Rim, which is right in the middle of Grand Canyon National Park. It's the so-called corridor trails. And there is really only one option, more or less, to get across the big ditch and connect those two trailheads. If you've been there, you know it's not entirely true. There's actually a little variation. But for the most part, you know, you're heading down the South Rim on Bright Angel Trail, and then you're crossing the river at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. You're going back up to the North Rim on the North Kaibab Trail. That is the only trail that will take you up to that main North Rim. You know, in theory, when you're talking about a rim to rim of the Grand Canyon, it doesn't have to be from the main North Rim to the main South Rim or vice versa. There are other options to get across the canyon. And I've kind of indicated one here in the upper left-hand corner of this map out to the west. There are other trail systems, not many of them, but there are a couple of other trail systems that maybe potentially could allow you to connect the two rims, mostly on trail. The challenge is that the only place to safely get across the Colorado River at the bottom of the Grand Canyon is on the main corridor trails, because that is the only spot where there are two bridges. So this picture right here is from an adventure that I had a couple of years ago, where two friends of mine and I did the so-called rim to rim to rim alt, which is the route that I indicated here in that light red line in the west of the canyon. But, you know, there are trails that take you from the rim to the river and then back up the other side, but there is no bridge at the bottom, so you have to swim the river. This is not something that I would recommend at all. Definitely do not even think about doing that on the corridor trails. There's very, very dangerous rapids right there. But, you know, there are some adventurous alternatives and variations on connecting Grand Canyon rim to rim in case you're curious. As far as the route going from the rim down to Phantom Ranch and then back up to the rim on the same side, in theory, that's a rim to rim as well, right? But Grand Canyon nomenclature is such that we actually wouldn't count that as a rim to rim. We'd count that as a rim to river to rim, where a rim to rim always connects with the opposite rim. The map that you're looking at right now zooms in on the corridor trails, and it shows you in more detail what type of mileage and what type of vertical change you are looking at if you are thinking about tackling that marquee, really well-known rim-to-rim trip. We're looking at about 23 miles going across, and we're looking at over 10,000 feet of elevation change, depending on which direction you're going. If you're going from north to south or south to north, you may have a little bit more up or a little bit more down, because the north rim is at about 8,000 feet, and the south rim is below 7,000 feet. So if you go north to south, you have more downhill. If you go south to north, you have more uphill. I do want to share with you some impressions and a bit of an idea of what you are going to find on maybe not a mile to mile basis, but kind of, you know, going through the various sections of hiking rim to rim. And I'm going to take you through that from the South Rim to the North Rim, because most visitors to the Grand Canyon start with visiting the South Rim. And so that's kind of the familiar perspective. Starting at the top of the South Rim. And if you follow Paul, this is my husband actually, he's literally pointing at the corridor and at those corridor trails that take you all the way across from south to the north. If you look closely, a little bit below his hand, down in the middle of the Grand Canyon, you can actually see a trail that takes you out on the middle level of the Grand Canyon that is called the Tonto Plateau. That's a trail that goes out to Plateau Point. That's not necessarily a trail that you'd be on if you're just doing a rim to rim in its purest manifestation, but it is a relatively quick and easy side trip of about 3 miles to get out to Plateau Point, and it's very, very beautiful. If you're starting your rim to rim backpack and you've kind of taken in a view from the south, you know what's coming and you've seen that amazing massive scenery and you're thinking, oh wow, I'm going to walk across that entire thing. You are now ready to start descending into the Grand Canyon. And there are two options. I kind of touched on that earlier. You can choose between descending the Bright Angel Trail or the South Kaibab Trail. They're both beautiful. They both have, you know, different trade-offs and options. But no matter which trail you choose, you're pretty much starting from the same spot and you're going down down, down, down. On pretty good, pretty well-developed trails, these trails are used by lots of hikers each day. They're used by mule trains that go down to Phantom Ranch at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. But you do have to be aware that it may not look like this depending on what time of year you're visiting, because it might just as well look like this. In the, kind of winter through early or sometimes even late spring months, you may find snow at the rims of the Grand Canyon. And, so that's something that you want to be ready for. If there is snow up high, this is what the trails may look like. It is very rare that the trails are not passable, particularly on the south side, but it does happen from time to time. So that's something we're going to talk about as well when we think about, how to plan for logistics of a hike like this. As you descend, though, even if it was snowy up top, you are going to leave that behind. You are going to descend through time and across a lot of switchbacks and lots of steep steps down into the depth of the Grand Canyon. It's going to start getting warmer. It is going to start getting a little bit more lush in terms of vegetation. And then if you are descending on the Bright Angel Trail, the first major waypoint or, first major segment end that you're going to come to is Havasupai Gardens, which used to be called Indian Gardens, now Havasupai Gardens, which is a campground about 5 miles down from the rim. It's beautiful camping in there. And this is the moment where you have an opportunity, if you were lucky enough to get camping capacity, camping availability at Havasupai Gardens, you can go ahead and you can do that side trip that I was talking about earlier, going out to Plateau Point on the Tonto Plateau. And Plateau Point is really beautiful because one, you can see amazing sunsets there, as you can tell from this picture here. But two, you also have a really beautiful view of the river. And, when you're starting at the top of the rim, of course, you will know this if you've visited the Grand Canyon before, you're not seeing the Colorado River from most anywhere on the south and on the north rim. There's a couple of spots where you can spot it from the rim, but those are very hard to get to. For the most part, the Colorado River is just this mythical kind of concept that we know has carved the Grand Canyon, but as visitors on the rim, we don't actually get to see it. If you hike out to Plateau Point, this is the first time where you really get to take it in its full glory. If you were lucky enough to get a camp spot at Havasupai Gardens and you maybe walked out to Plateau Point for a beautiful sunset and dinner, you are then in for a beautiful night of amazing stargazing and just beautiful starry skies, because light pollution in the Grand Canyon, as you can imagine, is very, very low. That means that if you are up in the night or if you are sleeping and camping without a shelter, without a tent potentially, you have a front row seat to some amazing, amazing stargazing. Moving on from Havasupai Gardens, you would continue further down towards the river. This section that we're looking at here is called the Devil's Corkscrew. You can see the steep switchbacks kind of on the left-hand side of the picture. This is what drops you from the Tonto Plateau level down into the inner gorge of the Grand Canyon and down towards the Colorado River. Once you have come down the Devil's Corkscrew, you are again now in shouting distance of the river, essentially, and you are quickly going to start approaching the two spots in the Grand Canyon where it is possible to safely cross the river on a bridge. In this photo that you're looking at here, you can see the Silver Bridge in the foreground, and then in the background, further upstream on the river, if you look closely, you can also see the Black Bridge. Those two trail bridges are the only two bridges across the Colorado River in the Grand Canyon. So if you are trying to go north to south, if you want to do a rim to rim in the conventional way, you have to come across one of those two bridges. You can see, looking at the water, below the bridges here, it is white water, there's rapids. It would be very, 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 very dangerous to try and avoid those bridges. And if you ever go on a big epic adventure far away from the spot that does require crossing the river, that is an entirely different beast. And it's not something that a lot of people do. Once you're at the river, you are now within shouting distance of Phantom Ranch and Bright Angel Campground. Phantom Ranch is an amazing historic ranch right at the very bottom of the Grand Canyon. There actually used to be a swimming pool down there many, many decades ago. So it is pretty impressive, to see the history and the architecture of those buildings. Now, Phantom Ranch is a place where if you're very lucky, you could spend a night sleeping in the cabins at Phantom Ranch, but those are very, very, very hard to reserve. It's a lottery and it takes a lot of luck and a lot of persistence to be able to get reservations and, years of planning to make that happen. So be aware of that. Because Phantom Ranch is so highly in demand and so difficult to get reservations at, what most hikers and backpackers will do is they will secure reservations or permits for Bright Angel Campground, which is the campground that's right across from Phantom Ranch. And it's still a really beautiful spot to be. And you also still get to kind of experience Phantom Ranch because if you've pre-planned, you may be able to have reserved a meal there. And at the very least, if you're there during open hours for the cantina, you might be able to go and buy some lemonade and maybe even send a postcard from the bottom of the Grand Canyon, because there is the possibility to buy and then mail postcards. They get carried out from Phantom Ranch by mule. So it takes a couple extra days for sure for them to reach their target, but it's a very, very unique thing to do. And your postcards will get stamped with a little stamp saying this was sent from the bottom of the Grand Canyon. So it's a really cool keepsake for whoever you're sending that postcard to. Once you move past Phantom Ranch, and again, we're going from the south to the north at the moment, you're then entering what is called the box. It's kind of this, flat-ish area at the bottom of the Grand Canyon where you're now putting down miles. And it is very enjoyable, very beautiful hiking deep down in the canyon. It also can get incredibly hot in the summer. So that's something to be aware of. We're going to talk about conditions and temperatures more later on. Once you're down at Phantom Ranch, the elevation change kind of lets up for a little while and you're looking at just traversing from south to north at this point. If you're lucky, you may be able to make a side trip to Ribbon Falls, which is not far off the corridor trails and is a beautiful, beautiful waterfall. It used to be that there was a bridge that would get you to Ribbon Falls because you have to cross a creek in order to get there. That bridge, unfortunately, has been damaged and was removed not too long ago. So at the moment, there's no bridge. And depending on the conditions in the Grand Canyon, depending on water levels, you may or may not be able to actually access Ribbon Falls. But if you have a chance, this is a side trip that's absolutely worthwhile. And once you're past Ribbon Falls, you then start climbing towards the North Rim. Now, remember what I told you, that the North Rim is at about 8,000 feet, and you have a bigger vertical difference between the North Rim and the bottom than you have between the South Rim and the bottom. So if you are coming up the North Rim, just be ready for a long and arduous climb. You really, take it slow and steady, keep putting one foot in front of another, but you are going to be pushing and climbing about 6,000 feet in, one single go pretty much, because there's no camping opportunities between the bottom of the North Rim and the top of the North Rim. You have to be ready for that, and you have to know and trust yourself that your body is capable of handling that, on top of all of the work that you've already done and on top of the potentially challenging conditions that you may face. As you get higher up, this is hopefully what you're going to be feeling. This is what I typically feel like when I'm about to go and crest the rim. And then eventually you will have done it. You're up there, you're on the North Rim, you're now in a slightly more remote and, less accessible spot than you were when you started at the South Rim. And hopefully you're going to have the opportunity to go and once again take in those spectacular views and really bask in and celebrate the achievement that you've just accomplished and revel in all of the memories that you made by trekking across the Grand Canyon, literally walking through geologic history for billions of years. So that's the Grand Canyon rim to rim in pictures. It is, a bit of an impression of what you're going to see and what you may experience if you tackle a hike or backpack like this.